Breaking news, February 5th, 2026. And what I'm about to reveal will send shockwaves through everything you understand about American power, because in the last 72 hours, something absolutely unprecedented has occurred inside the Pentagon that nobody saw coming. This isn't about foreign threats. This isn't about overseas conflicts. This is about a domestic power struggle so severe that the United States military has done something it almost never does. It has drawn a constitutional line in the sand. And that line is aimed directly at containing what defense officials are now privately calling an existential threat to the chain of command itself. If you think this can't happen in America, if you believe our institutions are too strong to fracture, you need to pay attention right now, because we are witnessing in real time the moment when the Department of Defense stopped treating political pressure as background noise and started treating it as a national security emergency. What emerged from the Pentagon at 9:45 this morning wasn't a typical press release. It wasn't bureaucratic language designed to say nothing. It was a deliberate, carefully crafted statement that legal experts are calling the most constitutionally significant message from military leadership in modern American history. The statement was only 3 sentences long, but every word was chosen with surgical precision. Our allegiance is to the Constitution of the United States and to lawful orders issued through the established chain of command. We do not respond to requests that arrive through unofficial channels or that lack clear legal authority. We serve the American people, not political personalities. That statement landed like a bomb in Washington because everyone who understands how the Pentagon operates knows they don't issue messages like that casually. The Department of Defense doesn't do moral theater. It doesn't engage in political posturing. It doesn't issue public rebukes for entertainment. When military leadership speaks in explicit constitutional language, it means someone has crossed a line so dangerous that silence itself has become a threat to national security. According to sources inside the Pentagon who spoke to reporters under condition of anonymity because they fear retaliation, the statement came after a late-night emergency meeting on February 3rd. Involving the highest levels of military leadership, civilian defense officials, Pentagon legal counsel, and national security advisors. The meeting lasted 4 hours, and the discussion was described as intense, focused, and alarming. What triggered that emergency gathering wasn't a single incident. It was a pattern of escalating pressure that began in mid-January and has intensified dramatically in the past 2 weeks. Sources describe a coordinated campaign of informal requests coming from outside the official chain of command, requests that started small and grew progressively more aggressive, more explicit, and more dangerous. The initial contacts reportedly began around January 15th, when individuals closely connected to Trump's political operation started reaching out to mid-level Pentagon officials. The requests seemed innocuous at first, requests for routine briefings on military readiness, inquiries about equipment availability, questions about contingency planning procedures. But according to multiple sources, the nature of those inquiries changed rapidly. Within days, the requests became more specific and more troubling. Questions about troop deployments near major American cities, inquiries about legal authorities for domestic military operations, requests for intelligence assessments on civilian political organizations and protest movements, questions about command structures and who controls what assets under various emergency scenarios. When those initial inquiries were politely deflected by mid-level officials following standard protocol, the pressure escalated immediately and dramatically. The calls started coming from higher-level political operatives with closer connections to Trump himself. The tone shifted from polite requests to increasingly aggressive demands, and the implicit message became impossible to ignore. Remember who will be running this place soon. Remember who signs your next promotion. Remember that loyalty is noticed and disloyalty has consequences. That's when senior Pentagon leadership realized this wasn't routine political pressure. This was a systematic attempt to establish unofficial channels of influence over military assets and operations, and that triggered alarm bells at the highest levels of the Defense Department. According to sources familiar with the emergency meeting, Pentagon lawyers presented a legal analysis that was described as devastating. The pattern of requests, when examined collectively, suggested an attempt to bypass constitutional civilian control by creating informal command relationships that would allow political operatives to access military resources without going through lawful channels. In plain language, it looked like an effort to turn parts of the military into a political instrument answerable to Trump personally, rather than to the constitutional chain of command. And that is precisely the scenario that every military officer is trained to recognize as a threat to the republic itself. The decision that emerged from that 4-hour meeting wasn't a dramatic declaration of resistance. It was a cold, procedural firewall. No engagement with any request that doesn't come through official channels with clear legal authority and documented constitutional basis. No informal coordination, no politically framed operations, no ambiguity whatsoever. And because Washington operates on information and silence breeds speculation, the decision was made to issue the public statement this morning to make the boundary crystal clear and publicly visible. The reaction from Trump's political operation was immediate, aggressive, and exactly what Pentagon officials expected. Within 90 minutes of the statement being released, Trump posted on social media calling the Pentagon leadership deep state traitors and enemies of the American people. He accused generals of sabotaging the will of voters and demanded that loyal members of Congress take immediate action to remove what he called insubordinate military leadership. By noon, allied conservative media outlets were running segments about a military coup in progress. By 2 p.m., Republican lawmakers closely aligned with Trump were calling for emergency hearings to investigate Pentagon leadership for insubordination and dereliction of duty. But here's what makes this moment so dangerous and so different from normal political conflict. This isn't a disagreement about policy. This is a direct challenge to whether independent institutions still have the constitutional authority to enforce boundaries when political power demands compliance. Trump's response transforms an internal institutional safeguard into a public loyalty test. It frames military adherence to constitutional limits as betrayal, and it pressures elected officials to choose between institutional stability and personal allegiance to one man. And once that choice becomes public, once lawmakers have to decide whether to defend constitutional boundaries or attack the institutions enforcing them, you are no longer in the realm of normal democratic politics. You are in a constitutional crisis. The ripple effects hit Capitol Hill within hours, and the fractures are already visible. A faction of hardcore Trump loyalists immediately began preparing resolutions to condemn Pentagon leadership and demanding investigations designed to force compliance. But notably, a significant number of traditionally conservative Republicans, particularly those with military backgrounds or on armed services committees, have remained conspicuously silent. And in Washington, that silence is deafening because it signals uncertainty, discomfort, and an unwillingness to publicly defend actions that they privately recognize as constitutionally problematic. According to congressional sources, bipartisan staff from the Senate Armed Services Committee have already reached out to the Pentagon requesting private briefings on the situation. That's significant because it indicates that at least some lawmakers understand this isn't about partisan politics. It's about whether the military can maintain constitutional boundaries without being destroyed politically for doing so. Sources describe conversations happening behind closed doors, where even some Trump allies are quietly expressing concern about the precedent being set, not because they oppose Trump, but because they understand that a military responsive to informal political pressure rather than lawful orders is a national security catastrophe waiting to happen, regardless of who holds power. Meanwhile, other federal agencies are reportedly treating this situation as a containment emergency. According to sources in the intelligence community, there has been a quiet but noticeable tightening of information, security protocols, increased monitoring of communications, for any signs of attempts to recruit active duty personnel into political activities, and heightened security postures at key federal facilities. This isn't visible to the public, it's not announced, but it's happening because professional security officials recognize that when the military draws a constitutional line and gets attacked for it, the risk of further escalation and potential violence increases dramatically. Internationally, allied governments are watching this unfold with what diplomatic sources describe as deep alarm. America's military credibility is the foundation of global alliances and deterrence frameworks. If allies begin to perceive internal instability in U.S. command and control structures, they start contingency planning quietly. They don't announce it publicly, they don't interfere, but they adjust their strategic calculations because their national security depends on American institutional stability. And adversaries are watching too. Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they are all monitoring this situation closely because domestic political chaos in the United States creates opportunities for them to test boundaries, to probe weaknesses, and to advance interests while American attention is focused inward. Financial markets have also begun reacting. Defense sector stocks showed unusual volatility this afternoon as institutional investors processed the implications of a public confrontation between military leadership and the incoming political establishment. Markets hate institutional uncertainty, and what's happening right now is uncertainty at the highest level of American government. This is why the Pentagon's statement this morning represents what analysts are calling a point of no return moment. Not because the military is seizing power, but because the military has publicly stated it will not move outside constitutional boundaries, regardless of political pressure. That's the firewall, and once that firewall is visible and under attack, the political figure being constrained has limited options. Trump can escalate rhetorically, and he clearly is, attacking generals, demanding loyalty, calling for punishment. He can attempt legal pressure, filing suits, or claiming the Pentagon is refusing lawful orders. He can push Congress to investigate and punish defense officials. But every option carries enormous risk because the more aggressively you attack military institutions for enforcing constitutional limits, the more you confirm that your goal is personal control rather than lawful governance, and that alienates crucial constituencies, including veterans, institutional conservatives, and moderate voters. What we're witnessing on February 5th, 2026, is a system testing itself. Both sides are now locked in. The Pentagon cannot back down without abandoning its constitutional obligations. Trump cannot back down without appearing weak to his base. And the country is forced to watch as this confrontation unfolds with three possible outcomes. 1. Containment. Where the boundary holds, Trump shifts focus to other battles, and institutions quietly reinforce safeguards without further public rupture. 2. Prolonged paralysis. Where Trump keeps escalating, Congress remains split, and governance becomes impossible as institutions spend all their energy defending themselves. 3. Direct confrontation, where Trump attempts to force compliance through extra-constitutional means, triggering formal investigations, legal battles, and potentially unprecedented constitutional procedures to protect the chain of command. None of these paths is clean. All of them damage public trust. The question isn't whether there will be consequences, the question is whether the damage will be survivable. And the answer depends entirely on whether enough Americans, including enough elected officials, understand that what's at stake isn't partisan advantage. What's at stake is whether institutions can still enforce boundaries when power becomes personal. The Pentagon didn't draw this line to oppose Trump politically. They drew it because someone tried to use the military for purposes that violate constitutional limits, and they determined that complying would threaten the republic itself. That's the moment when democracy stops being a normal political contest and becomes a test of whether the guardrails still function. And right now, those guardrails are being tested like never before in modern American history.